It's unusual that I get 2 requests to make something that I've never heard of before, and sounds very good to make. And I had 2 just in the last few weeks, people perhaps of Welsh origin, who wanted to know if I'd ever made Bara Brith. And I haven't. I'd never heard tell of it before, but it kind of intrigues me that now that I've read the recipe. I know it won't be exactly like Italian panettone, but it's a bread with fruit and whatever in it. A bread like white bread with fruit and things added. These are the ingredients required, so I'll go through those, all except for some honey. The last thing you do when it's still warm out of the oven is brush on some honey. So I haven't got the honey out yet. There's 450 grams of it. This is an English or Welsh recipe, so they say strong white flour. I'm using bread flour. 225 milliliters, or 8 fluid ounces, 1 cup of lukewarm milk, and I just warmed it briefly in the microwave, 10 seconds or so. 150 grams of dried fruit. I'm using candied orange peel, golden raisins, and currants, and there's 150 grams in that bowl there. 75 grams, or 2.5 ounces, of demerara or turbinado sugar, neither of which can be found in captivity here anywhere. I'm using a light brown sugar, my substitute. An egg beaten. 2 teaspoons of dried yeast, and once again I'm using the instant yeast. The link below for the recipe is for using regular dried yeast, and it tells you how to proof it using the milk and a little sugar to proof it, but with the instant yeast that isn't necessary, so I'm skipping over that area. A teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of mixed spice. Both are in here with the sugar. As near as I know, there isn't anything on our spice shelves here that's called mixed spice. I presume that's a European or an English thing. And in the recipe here, they've put in brackets or pumpkin spice. So what I bought was pumpkin pie spice. It's a mixture of cinnamon and clove and mace and nutmeg, all mixed together. I don't know if it's in equal proportions or not, but that's the seasoning that I'm using. And I don't know if I mentioned the butter or not, but it's 75 grams of cold butter. So let's get started with this. I'm going to be using the stand mixer and the dough hook and all that sort of thing because I'm too lazy to do all that kneading myself. But the first step pretty much has to be done by hand, or you could do it in your food processor. I'm going to do it by hand. That's just the flour, the 450 grams of flour, and this is the butter. And you rub them together to incorporate the butter into the flour. So do that with your fingers. I think you can get the idea. I've got another minute or so left of doing this, but you don't need to sit there and watch me, so I'll bring you back when I have on the stand mixer. Well, I have the butter pretty well incorporated into the flour. Now I'm adding the yeast. If you were using just regular dry yeast, you would probably proof it in the milk with a little bit of sugar. And this is the brown sugar, the salt, and the spice. Mix those together as much as possible. Now adding the lukewarm milk. Don't want it too hot because it will kill the yeast. A little too cool won't hurt anything, I guess, just slows things down, but too hot you'll kill the yeast. The beaten egg. Free range beaten egg. This gets mixed. You would turn it out on a board if you were, and knead it by hand if that's what you're doing, but I'm going to be using the stand mixer. It would knead it for 7 to 10 minutes once it's been mixed together. And it may still be a bit wet, so in that case you'd add a little extra flour, but we'll see what happens. I'll bring you back and show you what it looks like if I have to add anything extra. You can hear me above the racket or not. I added 3, maybe 4 dessert spoons of extra flour. So it got up onto the dough hook and is being kneaded. I'll now let it knead for another 6 or 7 minutes. So it's had its kneading for 7 or 8 minutes altogether, I guess. It's still a soft dough and fairly sticky. Perhaps in the last process I'll need some more flour into it, but I'm not sure. I've put a little oil in this bowl, and now it gets covered and rests until it's double in bulk. With the amount of yeast and sugar that's in there, I wouldn't think it'll take too much more than an hour. So, bring you back when it has finished rising anyway. Well, I let it go longer than I thought I would. It went about an hour and a half, but it's doubled or more than doubled in bulk. A little flour on the board here. And this is when you incorporate the fruit, dried fruit. Try to get as big a surface as possible to get started with, I guess. Keep folding it. Sort of like making puff pastry, and instead of butter you've got fruit. You just keep folding it over, which makes more and more layers, which mixes the fruit further into the dough. A little bit of flour on the meat kneading board here made all the difference. It's no longer sticky. Now what I'm doing is just trying to increase the surface tension. I've got it mixed as much as I want to mix it, but I'm going to try to make it into a round. Just keep bringing up the corners here and try to get it to stay together in some sort of a round shape. In the instructions recipe, which you can look at, the lady said to make her loaf look better when it's finished. I don't know if she means now or before it goes in the oven. She picks off all of this fruit on top because it will scorch in the oven. So I think I'll let it rise first, and some of it may get incorporated when it rises anyway. And hopefully this surface tension enough that that won't turn into a big pancake. And their instructions again are to put it on a greased or oiled pan or sheet that it's going to be baked on. But That means clean up, and I don't like cleanup. So I'm going to use, as I always use, parchment paper. First time I ever had I guess it's just unbleached, sort of brown colored parchment paper. And actually, after I bought this and noticed on the package, this is actually made in France. Now let it double again. I don't think I'll let it go up to an hour, maybe a half hour, 45 minutes, something like that. In the meantime, preheat the oven to 400 degrees. It's a little over a half hour, and I guess it's doubled in bulk. I am going to pick off some of these pieces of fruit that might scorch in the oven. A snack to have while it's baking. This goes into a 400 degree oven for 30 to 35 minutes. And find the instructions here. If you were using what they call a fan oven, we would call that a convection oven. It would be 350 degrees in a convection oven, but 400 in a conventional oven, gas oven like I'm using. So 30 to 35 minutes. Bring you back and show you what it looks like when it comes out of the oven. I hope it's done inside. It was getting a little dark on the outside, so I brought it out at the 30-minute point. Has a nice hollow sound to it anyway. Did it ever grow in the oven? It's twice as large as when I put it in there. I'm going to leave it on the parchment paper if possible. Because right now it gets coated with a little warmed up honey, painted on honey. So I've got to warm up some honey, and I'll be right back. How much honey will be required? I've got 2 or 3 tablespoons here. The idea is just so that it'll have a softer crust when it cools and you're ready to cut it. Don't think you want it to be terribly sticky. I suppose as it's cooling down, some of the honey will absorb into the crust. Well, I've got to wait an hour or so at least until this cools enough that I can cut it without squashing it all to pieces when it's warm and soft. I'll bring you back at that time and we will try this thing. It looks good at this point anyway. Well, it's been cooling for at least an hour now. I'm not so sure that I'm in favor of the painting it with honey. It's still got a sticky surface. I think what I'll do is cut it right in half to see what the inside looks like. Well, there's a fair amount of fruit the whole way through. And I wouldn't say that it's 100% done in the center. Maybe I should have left it that extra 5 minutes, I don't know. I want a piece, as usual, that has lots of crust on it. I like the crust. This is still reminding me very much of the Italian panettone, which I just happened to have bought one today, so I will show you a slice of that before I close this down. It's very good. Flavor is a bit different than panettone, but as far as texture goes, with the fruit and everything, it's quite similar. You don't need to watch me eat the whole loaf. I think the very center of it still might be a little underdone. I was scared if I left it any longer that the crust would really burn, because it was getting quite dark. There's so much sugar in it that it will get dark quite quickly. Perhaps if I tinted it with some foil or whatever. Well, before I close this down now, I'll just show you a slice of the panettone to compare to it. Well, there are the two side by side. This is the Bara Brith, and this is panettone. Commercially made panettone. I've never made my own. But this time of year, coming up to Christmas, it's always in the stores, and I have to buy some because I love it. I think in the future I will make Bara Brith. It's quite similar and very tasty. I'm not so sure if underdone or not. It's all very soft dough, and there's this large cavity in the center, I guess is what made me think it was underdone. It's like a big bubble hole there. Maybe when I was folding it over and over or something, I managed to create that. It's a very soft, sweet dough, so perhaps a little underdone, but not much, I don't think. Well, that is Bara Brith, the Welsh enriched bread with fruit. I hope you'll give it a try. It was quite easy to make, and it is delicious. Thank you very much for watching.